All right, let's continue with our college basketball off-season grades that we've been doing on this channel over the last couple weeks. If you're new to the channel, here's what you need to know. Basically, it is now essentially Memorial Day week. Everybody in college basketball, their rosters are for the most part set, although ironically not the team that I'm talking about right now, which we'll get into in a minute. And because most teams' rosters are set, I think we can accurately grade how the offseason went. And so we're doing this for all the major programs. Some of them have been posted, some of them haven't. North Carolina, Michigan, Kentucky, Indiana, Arkansas, Texas, on and on and on and on and on. So I've done some of these will be posted. But what you need to know, the team that I am talking about today is the team that I just mentioned, and a team that is basically, in most years, the gold standard of college basketball, the University of Kentucky. Just one problem. They are coming off a year where not only were they not the gold standard of college basketball, they weren't the bronze standard, they weren't the platinum standard, they weren't any standard other than the bottom of the barrel, about as bad as it got. And look, we all know what happened with Kentucky last year. They finished 9-16 overall. And in some ways, I will defend John Calipari by saying everything that could go wrong did, right? Like, it's no secret that no program outside of maybe Duke was going to be impacted more by having the short offseason schedule for Kentucky. On top of that, it comes at a time when you have an entirely new roster. Only one scholarship player that played the season before, Keon Brooks, was back, but he was injured. On top of that, an entirely new roster. On top of that, Kenny Payne, your lead assistant for many years, is gone. And it all leads to this disastrous 9-16 season. And I'm not going to defend John Calipari, and I'm not going to say that he's not to blame, because he is. He is the face of Kentucky basketball. But I will also say that for everything that went wrong last season, I will give him a ton of credit, as he has done just about everything right since the season ended to make sure that not only does it not happen again, but that Kentucky is back in position to compete at the top of the SEC going into next year. Will they? It'll be a challenge because everybody else in the SEC got better, but I also love what John Calipari did, so let's get into it. First of all, we're going to get to the roster in a second, but before you can talk players, the bottom line is you need to have your staff in place, and there was a little bit of turmoil last year on that coaching staff. Not blaming any one person, not saying it's anybody's fault, but at the same time, as I've said many times, if you watch that team, you could tell that there was a disconnect between the coaching staff and the players. It was especially evident in no arenas with no fans. You can hear John Calipari yelling and screaming. The benches are spread out. And then when John Calipari yells at a guy, what happens? Same guy comes back to the bench looking for some coaching from one of the assistant coaches, and everybody's sitting there with their arms crossed, not saying anything. And so it was clear that maybe something, maybe there was coaching going on behind the scenes, but in public it wasn't very impressive. And so change had to be made, and it was done in the biggest way possible, as two of the elite assistant coaches in all of college basketball are now at the University of Kentucky. Orlando Antigua, who was at Kentucky from 2009 to 2014, he returns to Kentucky to work alongside John Calipari. He brings his buddy Chin Coleman. Both of them had worked at Illinois last season, helping Illinois turn into one of the powers in college basketball. And John Calipari goes out and nabs two of the elite assistant coaches in college basketball, who are also two elite recruiters, who are two elite relationship people. Players love them. I thought it was interesting that the second that it was announced, even before it was announced, that Chin Coleman was leaving Illinois, Ayo Dosunmu, Illinois' All-American point guard, was already going out of his way to say how much he loved Coach Chin and how much Illinois is going to miss him. So first of all, the coaching staff revamped. Credit to John Calipari. It's paying dividends in recruiting, which we'll get into in a minute. But let's talk about some of the roster overhaul, because it really was an overhaul at Kentucky. First of all, a couple guys decide to go pro. B.J. Boston, of course, leaves after a year. The late Terrence Clark. And look, it's tragic what happened with Terrence Clark. He passed away this offseason. I'm assuming everybody listening knows this, but he decides to leave before his tragic passing. Olivier Sarr, the highly touted transfer from Wake Forest last year, he decides that he is going to go pro after 4 years in college. He got his degree, as far as I know, and so he decides that he was going to go pro. He was always only going to come to Kentucky for 1 year. And then on top of that, you do have a few transfers as well. Devin Askew decides to leave the program. and also Cam Fletcher decides to leave the program. And so what I would say is, while that sounds like a lot of turnover, I also don't know that Kentucky was sad to see any of those guys go. Now, obviously, it's a little bit of a different deal with Terrence Clark. We get that because he passed away. But from a basketball perspective, those guys underperformed, were part of the problems, didn't live up to expectations, and maybe it was best for everybody for those guys to move on. In their place, I love what Kentucky did. I should also mention, by the way, Kentucky is one of the few teams that I am doing these kind of reviews and recaps for, that their roster, there are still some major pieces that are in flux right now. So for people who do not know, as I'm recording here, Isaiah Jackson, 5-star power forward, was one of the few bright spots for Kentucky. He is testing the draft waters, but it feels like he was a guy that should have declared and left and never looked back. But he seems to be hanging out in Kentucky, loving Kentucky. He doesn't seem to be in a rush to leave. It seems like it's at least possible, even if it's not likely, that he could end up coming back to Kentucky, although, as I said, it's not likely. On top of that, Davion Mintz, who, again, another one of the few bright spots on last year's roster, great three-point shooter, played at Creighton in the early part of his career. He is testing the waters as a fifth-year senior that has an extra year of eligibility because of the NCAA waiver. And then, of course, Keon Brooks is indecisive as of right now as well. Could return, could transfer, could test the draft waters. So those three are still in limbo. And let me say, I think Kentucky would gladly welcome any of those three back. But I also think, based on what they have done this offseason, if all of them go, I still like this Kentucky roster. So first of all, to get to the returnees, I think the guys that had to return did. You didn't want key role players transferring, even if they were in fact still role players, and essentially they're all back. Dante Allen, who was an elite three-point shooter, decides to return. He's, of course, a Kentucky, really a high school icon in the state of Kentucky. He decides to return, and I think it's important because even before we knew who Kentucky was recruiting, you need to retain your best three-point shooter. On top of that, Lance Ware, big energy hustle guy, is coming back as well. And Jacob Toppin, who I actually think is pretty good. Now, Jacob Toppin is an interesting story because he wasn't even expected to play last season because he was transferring. Instead, everybody gets a waiver. He plays. I thought he was really good in a role, and the question now is, with all that athleticism, can he evolve into an NBA-type talent? Because I'm telling you right now, I know some NBA people that really believe that he is, in fact, an NBA-type talent. What's more important than who is coming back is who they brought in. And I love what Calipari did in the transfer portal. And I'll give Calipari credit, right? He was hesitant to fully embrace the transfer stuff 2, 3, 4 years ago. He ain't anymore, as they jumped 2 feet in, and I love what they got. So first of all, the first big piece was actually on campus during the wintertime. Oscar Tshiebwe, low post player, physical, bruising guy. 2 years ago at West Virginia, he was actually their leading scorer and rebounder as a freshman, 11 points, 9 rebounds per game in that freshman season. He decides to leave West Virginia midway through last year. He transfers to Kentucky. He's on campus. He is practicing with the team. And for the first time in a long time, he is the low post physical player that they absolutely need. One of the biggest problems they had last season, they just didn't have a guy that they could dump it down low to and get an easy bucket. He should be that guy, as now a third-year player and just a bruiser down low. Another problem they had, I think anybody who watched Kentucky knows this, weren't a great three-point shooting team outside of Dante Allen. So what do? Oh, I don't know. They go get Kellen Grady, 17-point per game scorer at Davidson last year, a player that did have that extra year of eligibility, one of those players that is only in the transfer portal because of that extra year of eligibility. He's coming to Kentucky. He's a dynamic scorer. I am really excited, and he's obviously going to be playing alongside the best roster and the most talent that he's ever played with. CJ Frederick, 47%, three-point shooter at Iowa last year, one of the elite shooters in all of college basketball, and a guy that can absolutely light it up. So those two guys alone solve your three-point shooting issues alongside Dante Allen. Doesn't hurt that, oh, by the way, you just went out and got a 5-star combo guard in recruiting, Ty Washington. Really excited to see what he brings to the table. And if everything ended there, I would really like what Kentucky did. But on top of that, after all that, they go get Severe Wheeler, point guard, second team All-SEC out of the transfer portal from the University of Georgia. And I love this guy and what he is going to bring at Kentucky. He is a true point guard. Yes, he's not a great three-point shooter, but guess what? when you average 7.5 assists per game for a lousy Georgia team, and now you're playing with some of the best shooters in college basketball, I don't think you need to be a great three-point shooter. So I love Sahvir Wheeler. You know what else I love? Any Kentucky fan who watched his commitment or watched his press conference will tell you he's just a really mature, grown man. So all that immaturity stuff, off the court nonsense that plagued Kentucky last year, it ain't going to be an issue next year. You got grown men, you got hungry guys. Everybody is coming to Kentucky to compete for a national championship. And so I love what John Calipari did. Revamp the staff, revamp the roster. More importantly, didn't just go out and get big names, but got pieces that fit. They need that low post guy. They got Oscar Tshiebwe. They need three-point shooting. C.J. Frederick, Kellen Grady. They need a point guard. They now have Ty Washington and Sahvir Wheeler, and you let them battle it out and see who should be point guard, who should be playing off the ball. I like them. I like them a lot, and you still have the chance of Davion Mintz, Keon Brooks, and Isaiah Jackson coming back. All three won't, but all three can if they want to. So I love what John Calipari did, and I got to be honest. I got to give him an A. I know things have been going the wrong direction for a few years. I know that's actually, frankly, tough to say because they just won the SEC title. But this team, I think, is going to be geared up, locked in, and ready to go come opening night of college basketball. I am so fired up to watch this team next season. And so I give John Calipari an A. I thought he was awesome this offseason. He did everything that a Kentucky fan could ask for. If you enjoyed this video, please do me a quick favor, subscribe to this channel. You can also catch up on what everybody else in college basketball did this offseason by listening to all of the other videos that I've done. As I said, North Carolina, Michigan, Texas, Arkansas, on and on and on and on and on. So make sure to listen to those. Also, make sure to subscribe to the Aaron Torres podcast and find me on Twitter at Aaron_Torres and find me on Instagram at Aaron Torres Pod.